Reading manhwa in today's day and age feels like panning for gold. You have to sift through the solo leveling clones, the identical rom-coms and dramas, the perennially axed 30-chapter original series, and when you've been in the game for a while, it feels like there's no more good stuff out there to read. But every now and again, you stumble onto something special. That series was Kubera. This video will serve as a mostly spoiler-free, in-depth review and analysis of what makes this series great and why I personally consider it among the best manhwa ever written. Now, let's get this out of the way. Maybe contrary to the title of the video, Kubera is not some super obscure story. It was decently popular on the Korean version of Webtoon, especially in the site's infancy, and has a hearty 59 million views on the English Webtoon app. This sounds like a really big number, but for comparison, Tower of God has 1.3 billion views per the English app, which makes it 23 times more popular. My point is that recommending Kubera isn't like your friend recommending a local band they saw at a dive bar with 30 monthly listeners on Spotify. This is a real story that's over a decade old at this point. So man, what the hell is Kubera? Kubera is a high fantasy manhwa with strong mystery elements starring a whopping 10 main characters, most prominently Kubera Lees, the overt protagonist, as they travel across planet Willarv and the Three Realms. First, let me address the elephant in the room for new readers. Man, Kubera is fucking long. At the time I'm writing this, we're sitting at around 700 chapters. This might be really intimidating for a new reader, but let me put it to you this way. It might take 2 minutes to read a chapter. Over 700 chapters, that's 1,400 minutes. 1,400 minutes is 23 hours. So if you think about it like a TV show, we're looking at 2 seasons of 12 episodes, assuming hour-long episodes. 1,400 minutes is shorter than the first 2 seasons of Grey's Anatomy, a show with 22 seasons. But of course, this is a long runtime for its medium. Few series really approach a number like 700 chapters. This begs the question, what are these 700 chapters being used on? The story of Kubera could not be told in your more regular 200 chapter format. The breadth of the story, the scale, the profundity would have to be dramatically cut to fit a more economic length. And that's the fucking good stuff you'd be losing out on. The story is already paced slowly, and that's simply because the world is so huge. We, as manga readers or anime watchers, may think of slow pacing as always being a bad thing, calling to mind those Bollywood-esque triple camera angles to pad their runtime. But what it really means in this context is that we get to become intimately familiar with these characters, who are really the strength of the series. You may hear in writing circles, especially for novels, that when you have believable, fleshed-out characters, they write themselves. The plot essentially becomes predicated on the actions of those characters, and the author more or less allows the characters' unique motivations and personalities to dictate what happens next. This leads to a really natural plot progression, but of course, the reader needs to become aware of who those characters are to make this all believable. Kubera is one such story where its characters dictate its plot. Kurigam, the brilliant author of Kubera, takes excellent care to flesh out just enough of her characters for the reader to recognize them as sentient actors, to understand why they act the way they choose to, or to hold back just enough to keep their motivations mysterious and fascinating. I have read many long-running manga and manhwa, and none have come close to handling their massive cast as well as Kubera does. For a story with dozens of characters spanning gods, magicians, ordinary people, and immortal animal dudes that covers 3 dimensions and 5 or so planets, the world retains this tremendous sense of connection. Even comparably minor characters have story significance because they're important to the more main characters. You could weave a spiderweb between every single character in Kubera and have nobody on an island. Someone always has an eons ago lover, or archenemy, or longtime friend that we're familiar with. And as the main 10 progress with the story, these characters they once knew get to unveil themselves and take on more active roles. It feels as though no character is an afterthought, which can be a big problem for an ensemble cast. So, okay, the characters are good and managed well. I'm still not sold. Character development, who cares? Where's my hype moments and aura? This is technically an action series, but this is a lot like One Piece, where you're really not reading this for cool fight choreography or beam clashes. The action is a vehicle to tell the story, not really the reason to tell the story like in your traditional battle shonen. That's not to say, though, that the action is bad. In fact, Kubera largely succeeds as a fantasy action series. Fights aren't these big events, but they're still enjoyable to read because of how intrinsically cool the power system is. Kubera's power system has 2 facets, magic and transcendental skills. Magic is spells used by humans that more or less channel the gods by the power of calculus. These work like D&D spells with limited uses depending on practice and innate talent. Transcendentals are those attacks with cool names that are unique to specific characters or items that we might expect from your average battle shonen. And you know, as long as I get to see people shoot lightning and fire at each other or turn into giant monsters, I'm a happy man. But the real thing that I appreciate about the action aspect of Kubera is Kurigam clearly understands how to avoid power creep. For those uninformed, that's the phenomenon where the early fights are low-power battles involving, apprentice ninja who make dummies out of logs. And then by the end of the series, your ninja who used to throw kunai at each other are throwing spirit bombs around. This isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it can be tough to write multiple super strong characters at once, especially when not everyone is on that level. This is the so-called Superman dilemma in writing, where you have to somehow contain your strongest character or characters so that you can actually tell a meaningful story. Kubera is a series with a lot of really strong characters. So how does my glorious goat Kurigam avoid this issue? She cuts off the power creep before it can begin. To avoid her planet destroyers from wrecking her more grounded story, she applies what's basically a power tax onto them. The strongest beings in Kubera are the gods, who are pretty self-explanatory, just like most other fictional pantheons. Agni is god of fire, Varuna is goddess of water, and they're really strong like you might expect. Their even stronger counterparts are the Gnostica, strongest members of the Sura race, which are basically immortal monster people, like demons or yokai. Both of these groups are strong enough to end our story before it can even begin by sneezing extra hard, but each one is saddled with unique limitations if they want to be active in the human realm, where much of Lisa's journey takes place. Now, I wouldn't be glazing this hard if this incredible writing talent was just to nerf her characters. The stuff to write home about is the way that they're nerfed. The method Kurigam uses of hampering these characters is always tied to their character conflicts. The most obvious example of this is Agni, the first god we meet. See, gods in Kubera can't just run around willy-nilly in the human realm. They have to be summoned by a person. And the power tax comes from this summoning system. The gods can only consume as much vigor, which is basically mana or chakra or nen, as their summoner can provide for them. Otherwise, they have to consume the summoner's lifespan. Now, this poses a real problem for Agni in particular because he's more or less head over heels for his summoner. He can't afford to really flex his magical muscles because he'll kill the woman he loves. This adds so much depth to his action scenes where he constantly has to weigh the worth of continuing a fight against the damage he'll do to her. In this way, his status as likely the strongest of the gods combat-wise is severely limited, and it doesn't feel like a cheap nerf. It's integral to the story of his character. So far, I've made Kubera sound like a simply well-executed fantasy adventure. In large part, that's what it is. But in equally large part, that's not the case. Kubera is kind of super fucking sad. Like much of my favorite media, it can be a bit of a pain train. It's not constant, and it's not really evident for the first few dozen chapters, but Kubera is equal parts mystery and tragedy as it is action comedy. There are big questions that may slowly reveal themselves as the answers are drip-fed. What is this mysterious cataclysm? Who is this golden-haired man? And the most important question of all, can this green-haired girl catch a fucking break? I mean, damn, bro. Let her be happy one time. Okay, enough glaze. Time to talk about weaknesses. The weakest part of the story depends on how you like your long stories. If you really hate slow pacing and want major events to happen often, you'll likely have a hard time getting through Kubera. It is a very slow burn, and it might feel like the things tend to drag on if you're not really invested in the characters. Similarly, if you really only like the mystery and the tragic drama, it may be harder to make it through the initial parts of the story that are more like a regular action-adventure story. Simply put, Kubera offers a lot of different flavors, and if you really like one part but not the other, it might not be something you're willing to sit through for hundreds of chapters. It can also be really taxing on your memory. Past events are referenced really often, and if you're not really paying attention, it can be tough to remember something the author mentioned once a few dozen chapters ago. This habit of referencing itself makes the plot really tightly written, but it can be a pain in the ass if you're not really making mental notes while you read and have to go back and remind yourself what happened. The length of the story works against it here. All of this stuff is sort of to each their own writing, though. I'm sure most of you who are used to work done by studios or legendary mangaka are probably thinking about the series' one biggest weakness. The art is just okay. It's consistently better than, say, early Tower of God for me, but it's not Berserk. As far as most big webtoons go, the art is significantly less polished than many readers might be used to. I think it's fine, and occasionally it's really good when Curry decides to put a few more hours into some close-ups or big scenes, but it's still probably a strike against the series in the eyes of most people. I said earlier in this video that I consider Kubera one of the best manhwa ever written. If it isn't clear by hearing me wax poetic about it for so long, I am obsessed with this series like I haven't been with anything in a long time. I just finished my first reread a few weeks ago, and I liked it even more the second time around. It jumped from a series I thought was excellent to one I can put on my Mount Rushmore. This is an abnormally good piece of art. Kubera is a story like a buffet. It has action, comedy, mystery, philosophical musings, pure, unadulterated fun, and raw, heart-wrenching sadness. And it's all wrapped up in this brilliantly written package. Where a lesser story might stray from its vision across 700 chapters, Kubera never runs away from the story it wants to tell. It pulls a chair out for the reader and invites them to dig in. It beckons you to get lost in the world it will show you. And, well, that's what reading fantasy is all about.